Hi, it's Jessica here with a live video, and I am going to be talking about three, that you should always say during a job interview. So, this video topic is basically in response to a comment that I received from someone that watched another video, which was called Three Things That You Should Not Say During Any Interview. So, someone had left a comment on that video basically saying, it would be really cool to actually talk about the things that job seekers should be saying during an interview. So here's the video. So I'm basically going to tell you about three things that I think as a recruiter, every single person should say during a job interview. But sometimes, for some reason, these three things get missed. So I was actually just talking to a friend of mine who's a nurse recruiter, and we were just kind of talking about this because I told her that I was going to be going live and talking about this topic. So I'll kind of kick things off and get started. So my number one thing that I always recommend people say during a job interview, but sometimes candidates don't say this for whatever the reason, is stating why you're actually interested in the job. So I actually personally ask every single job applicant that I speak with on the phone why they actually applied to the job. And sometimes I'm amazed at the response. There's a few times where I've actually heard a person just say they don't remember. And I'm just like, no, that's not what you're supposed to say. But I get it. You apply to many jobs, especially if you're actively searching or if you're not currently in a job. It's tough. So sometimes it's tough to keep up. However, you should definitely, at a minimum, be able to talk about why you're actually interested in the job, because if we don't really know that you're interested, or if that doesn't come across, and we have someone else that matches the job and they show how excited they are about the job opportunity, well, that person is going to get the job. For example, I hear a number of hiring managers tell me during a consensus following interviews that one person they weren't quite sure about because they just weren't understanding why they applied, if they were really interested or not. And it's like, well, they did interview, so I'm guessing they're interested. But you should definitely know and be able to state why you want that job, because the interviewers want to hear that. They want to make sure that if you are going to come into their company, you're going to be really excited about the job that you're going to be a part of. And then along with that, the company, like, do you know anything about the company? Take opportunities to actually share what you've already researched. I actually used to ask candidates, I would say something like, tell me what you already know about the company, and I'm happy to fill in any gaps. And this is a tactic that recruiters will use to kind of figure out if you've done any research, if you're really interested in the job or not. So I always recommend just stating why you're interested. So that was my number one. And hello, Pandy. Welcome. Thanks for joining. So my number two, as far as three things that you should always say during a job interview. It seems like common sense, but literally, candidates don't do this sometimes, and it really hurts them in the end. But you should always state why you personally are qualified for the job that you're interviewing for. And it's simple, talk about the skills that you bring, talk about your education, any certifications that are aligned with that role. And I think that sometimes candidates just assume that they don't have to really talk about it. They just have to answer interview questions. But you should always find a way to weave in the specific things that make you a perfect match for the role that you're applying to. It's really unfortunate that people don't do this and they don't sell themselves. It's like, I think we're all kind of wired to not brag about ourselves. I think this especially happens sometimes with my ladies that are on the job search, maybe because of the conditioning to not brag about ourselves. But this is the time that you need to brag when you're interviewing. You need to talk about yourself. You need to talk about why you're such a standout candidate. And sometimes it really gets missed. And that may be the reason that you may not get the job that you're looking for. Hello, welcome. Hi, Primping Ain't Easy TV. Welcome to the live. All right, so that was my number 2. My number 3 is so simple, but I am sometimes really surprised at this one that people don't do this. And it's just to take the time to actually verbally say thank you to your interview team. So you basically want to thank the interviewers for their time, especially verbally, because you want to wrap it up on a good note. You want to show that you appreciate their time, you're grateful. And this just shows a different kind of personality trait for someone that doesn't do this and someone that does. Something else that you want to remember as far as your thank you is to follow up with a thank you note when you can. It is always a positive to just thank your interview team, your recruiter, whoever you talked with. Just follow up with a thank you note. Literally, it kind of puts you not only in a positive light, but it reminds that interview team, oh yeah, she was great because of this, that, and whatever. You actually get to, in that thank you note, remind the team of why you're such a great match, why you're so interested. If you missed or you feel like you didn't really talk about why you're qualified as much or why you're interested in the job, that thank you note at the end can actually be a great chance to include that and make sure that they know exactly why you're interested and why you'd be a great match. So those are basically my main 3 things. I do have a story about a time where I did ask someone why they were interested in the company. And so one answer I heard was, oh, my friend works there. And it's like, okay, well, tell me more. That can't just be the only reason that you want to work at a place is because you know someone that's there. I think it's a good thing if you get someone to refer you to a job, but that shouldn't be your answer. I think the other response that I heard that was kind of weird was, oh, I just saw that you guys were hiring. And that's just like crickets. Like, okay, that's great. So anyway, those are some of the things that I hear. Definitely are not the things to say. You should definitely be very specific when you are talking about why you're interested in a certain job opportunity. It will only help you in the end. So just to kind of wrap up those points, and we can kind of take some questions from those that joined. But first, just state why you're interested in the job. Be specific. Don't be very general and say, well, I'm just looking for a job, because that's not going to help. The second thing is just stating why you're a great match for the role. Be ready to talk about this and sell yourself. Don't be afraid to say and don't be afraid to brag on yourself. And then number 3 is just make sure that you are following up with a thank you verbally after the interview, and then also following up with a written thank you so that you can kind of wrap up all the great things that they saw in that interview, and you can reinforce that with a very nice note. So those are my 3 tips. And I see some comments here. Great tips. Thank you, Pandy. Thank you. Thank you. So I don't want to make this a long live. I probably will stay on here for about 20 to 30 minutes. But is there anything that you guys have questions about in the comments? So coming from someone that has been a corporate recruiter for quite some time, tech recruiting. I've recruited in the corporate setting from a PR standpoint, accounting, finance. Even I've actually recruited forklift operators and jobs like that as well in factory locations. So I am interested in hearing your comments, but those are my main things. I've had definitely some interesting scenarios. I've had people literally freeze up on me during an interview. I remember one time I had a girl shaking during an interview. She was so nervous and just wasn't prepared. Had some horror stories for sure. So I guess no comments about jobs. It's late night, so I think most people are tired. Something else that I was thinking of just this week, because I was talking to someone that basically they weren't really sure what direction they wanted to go in. They're looking for a job and they're wanting to move in a different direction. So they want to kind of pivot from one industry to another, but they weren't quite sure about what exact job they wanted to do. So something I told them to do is to actually start researching and looking on LinkedIn. They did not have a LinkedIn profile. And I told them to create one because LinkedIn is literally where all of our HR and recruiting folks are looking for talent. And so that's where job seekers want to be. But I told them to start looking at some titles that they're interested in as far as job titles and research the person's profile. Like, where were they beforehand? What did they do? What kind of education did they have before getting into this job? And that may help them kind of figure out a path for themselves. And then I told them also just read up on job descriptions and kind of figure out what's interesting, what stands out, and go from there. So just to kind of be very specific, taking them from a very broad place to something more specific that they can actually focus on. Okay, I think I've got a couple of questions here. Okay, hello, real brother. Thanks for joining. Okay, I was in an interview with the governor's office a couple years ago. Okay. They use an acronym with which I had zero familiarity. I turned into a deer in the headlights. I was shook. Huh, that's interesting. I wonder what acronym it was. I think so. I think different industries will use certain acronyms, even different companies will use different acronyms. I mean, if you don't know what it is, just ask. Just ask. I mean, I think most people will understand, especially if you are moving into a different industry, that you may not know every single acronym. Like when you join a company, a lot of times there will be like a handbook or a guide or some information as far as all the company acronyms, because it really does kind of change up from company to company and industry to industry. Okay, so Penny's hair, Candy and more. Are your area specific with recruiting? Oh yeah, I get your question. Yeah, right now I am heavily into tech recruitment. So I actually made another video a few days ago talking about the specific tech skills that I see most companies are looking for and are very high in demand. But I've also recruited for marketing roles, public relations, accounting and finance, all your corporate positions as well. So very, very focused in corporate recruiting. Good question. Thank you for asking about that. Real Brother says, turns out I knew what it was. So you knew what the acronym was. Just should have opened my mouth and asked them to explain what it was. Lesson learned. Yeah. And this actually happens to me sometimes with IT candidates. Since there's multiple ways that you can say something or different technology, I may ask them, do you have experience with SQL? Well, SQL is a coding language that some people pronounce as SQL, other people pronounce as SQL. So, they may just ask me the clarifier. They may say, oh, SQL. I swear everyone says it differently. Just ask them, or say, oh, do you mean, or I'm not familiar with that. Can you tell me more? But yeah, you kind of learn as you go. Interviewing is tough. Sometimes you're like on the spot and it's like, so the more interviews you go on, the more comfortable you will be. Okay, so got a question from Primping Ain't Easy TV. When you interview for a job, you find out that you're not a good fit and they choose someone else. How do you ask the company or interviewer why they didn't choose you? That's a good question. And I will say that a lot of times companies are very cautious about providing feedback because basically we don't want to open up a can of worms. We don't want to say the wrong thing or make the feedback come off a certain way to where we have this kind of exchange of a candidate going, well, but I do have this, or but I could have done that, or this back and forth where they're trying to still kind of get in there when a decision has already been made. And then two, sometimes just depending on the industry, they want to make sure that they're not setting themselves up in a way that might open them up to a potential lawsuit of some kind. Because sometimes the feedback is literally, this candidate just had more skills in X, Y, and Z. Whereas I've worked at a company, a PR company, and I remember the reason they actually did not move forward with a candidate was that we had two candidates basically lined up in the same way as far as experience and years of experience and skills, yada, yada. However, one person had a hygiene issue. They smelled. And that was literally the reason they did not want to move forward. And it was literally apples to apples. So it wasn't like it was a case where the smelly person was more qualified or anything like that. That was just the situation. So sometimes it's tough. But I think as far as how you can get some feedback, if you have a good relationship with a recruiter or someone that works in HR, typically they will provide some feedback. And I think if you just ask in a way like, I'm really appreciative of you guys taking the time to interview with me. I want to make sure that I have some feedback as far as moving forward with other positions, so I know what I need to work on. Or if you say I'm newer to interviewing, I would like to see what I need to work on as far as the interview, or I'm really interested in your company and future opportunities. Please give me some feedback. I like to make sure I'm in a better situation for the next time I apply. Most people will be receptive to that and will open up and provide as much feedback as they can. Of course, if it's not something that's uncomfortable, like, oh, you were smelly in the interview, I think they will tell you. That only happened to me one time. That's why I made a video about proper hygiene for interviews, because sometimes people just don't know or they don't realize. Okay, so I think I missed a couple. Okay. Yes, great questions. Really good question. Or apples to onions. Oh gosh, I felt so bad for them. And I mean, I think you have to think of the industry too that you're applying to. So when you think of public relations or communications, it's an industry where appearance and hygiene, those are going to be very essential, because literally in the job, no matter if you are within the public relations realm or if you're supporting the PR teams, presentation is going to be so important. So the way you dress, the way you look, the way you smell, those little things can really make a difference. Whereas, and I think this was the case for this person, they were coming from an environment that was outside of public relations. And so maybe they didn't have that type of expectation. If you think of people coming from maybe manufacturing or other industries, they're going to be lax as far as how a person looks. Even with, like if you think of Amazon, like in their different warehouses and things, you can definitely get away with a lot more in those cases than if you work at Amazon corporate. There's going to be a different expectation. So those are just things to think about. I just saw Real Brothers comment about the username. This place is so litigious. Yes. A lot of companies are very careful when it comes to just making sure they're compliant. I actually started out, fun fact, I started out my first real big girl job, I guess, in compliance, actually. So a big part of what my job was to ensure that applicant data that we were receiving was actually compliant, so that we actually had reasons why all candidates that were rejected. Like we could actually say why, and actually had to send a file to the EEOC and make sure that all of the data was accurate. And so if they were to come to the company and say, well, why didn't you hire, I don't know, Susie McClellan? I just made that name up. We could actually tell them why. Whereas they would dig in deeper and have an audit for us. So it is a very tough place to be in when you're in an audit, and I have been through an audit like that. Companies do have to be very careful. Okay, I'm reading a comment. I'll remember never to smell like despair and hopelessness during the interview. Oh my goodness. Yeah, I mean, hygiene is definitely important when it comes to interviewing, but there's just a lot to think about. I always tell people that are just starting their job search, your first couple interviews may not be the best. It's just like anything else, you have to practice. There's certain styles of interviewing that you may have to get used to. Like, for example, behavior-based interviewing sometimes gets a bad rap from candidates because you're kind of put on the spot. And these are interviews that I do every single day. Behavior-based interview questions are what the company I work at use. And a lot of large companies use behavioral-based interviews now, but they're basically using questions that force you to provide a specific time when you did something in the past. And I think it's a mix of having to be put on the spot to think of an example and provide a lot of detail versus making up a scenario or say, oh, this is what I would do. You actually have to talk about what you've done in the past and demonstrate kind of these different behaviors and actions so that we can figure out what you might do if you were to be hired at our company. So kind of figures out, okay, how much initiative do you have? Do you work well with teams and things like that? You can kind of pick up from past examples. But I will say that people definitely have challenges with just providing examples of when they did something in the past. It amazes me. I recently talked to someone that had 10 plus years of experience in IT. I asked them a question about a project they completed. That wasn't the exact question, but basically that's what I was looking for in his answer, project they completed. He decided to use a school example instead of using an example that was from his work. So instead of actually talking about what he's been doing the past 10 years, he decided to talk about school projects. So it was really tough to kind of figure out what behaviors he would demonstrate. I'm still laughing at this comment about smelling like hopelessness and despair. Oh my gosh, real brother. So I guess I have a question. So, real brother, are you currently on the job search, or have you had like past examples where you can share of an interview that went really well? Because I also talk to candidates that just knock it out the park, and I'm just like, yes, yes, aced it. I can send them to the hiring team and hope for the best. Oh, I see a question. Have I ever had to end an interview before completion? Oh, yes, definitely. I try not to end an interview before really getting some essential information from them. But there's been a case where I asked the candidate, just because I knew they had a lot of experience, I decided to ask them about compensation a little earlier on because I didn't want to take up their time if it really wasn't going to be a match for them and put them through like asking all these other questions if realistically it wasn't going to work. And this person was already in a job already. So in that situation, I ended the interview. It was a phone interview, but I ended it early because the compensation was just out of range, just way out. And I don't normally count a candidate out, but I basically talked to them about like how flexible you are. This is basically kind of where the market would be. Are you comfortable with that? And it wasn't for them. And really their experience was just, they had a lot of experience. And so, with that, I wasn't going to take them through the process if in the end, if they were receiving an offer, we couldn't move forward. Most recruiters will have some idea of how flexible salary ranges are. We typically are using market data. Obviously, we kind of take into account a candidate's experience too. But some cases, it's just like, okay, you're looking for 75K more than what this is even going to be. Perfect ain't easy TV. Yes, real brothers comments have been really funny. Okay, so I see another comment. I'm typically very good in the interview process. I had the one fluke because I went in a bit too cocky. I did not recover well. That is a good point. I talk to people regularly that I will reach out to before they have interviews with the hiring team. And typically they'll meet with 3 people and they'll be asked behavior-based questions, like a total of 12 questions. And the cases where the person's just too cocky to not even be receptive to the advice that I'm giving them and kind of the materials and things, they typically don't do so well. And I think they kind of underestimate the interviews. Whereas when I have someone that is very much receptive, even if they've gone through interviews, they're comfortable with interviews, but if they're receptive and open to feedback, they typically do better just because they're more prepared and they already kind of know what's coming. Because when I give a candidate an interview prep, I'm actually telling them, I'm giving them like example questions, like this is what you need to be ready for. Here's who you're going to talk to. This person is the hiring manager. I will ask them what questions they have for me, like if they have any concerns. Like we have a good conversation that way. If there is something that you're worried about or you have questions about, we can actually have that dialogue. But then 2, if there's something that you didn't even think about, like for example, I normally tell candidates, to, when they hear the question, either restate the question back to the interviewer or write the question down so that they don't get lost or get off topic, or they start talking and they don't even answer the question. But things like that, these tips that are like, okay, you kind of know in a general sense, but you don't really think about it. Like, you don't really focus on it before these interviews. That may be helpful. So that is a really good point. Don't be cocky. Like, yeah, don't do it. Okay. Okay. So, how would you suggest answering the question? What would you say is your greatest weakness? Okay. That is a good question. I won't say it's one of my favorites, but it is a popular question that interviewers will use. So, my advice for answering that question is to actually be as honest as you can be without making yourself look bad. So, the first thing is, if I were to be applying for a recruiter job. So, a recruiter job requires me to be on the phone a lot, talk to multiple people, multitask, do some administrative things. So, a weakness for me might be that I don't do so well with when I am remote, like in a remote position where I'm not really talking or collaborating with people on a regular basis. And so I give that example only because it would not relate directly with the job I'm applying to. One way that I see people go wrong with that question is they provide a weakness that should not be a weakness for the job they're applying to. So, for example, for an accountant to say that they're not good with handling a lot of details is terrible. It's a terrible response. It could be very honest, but it's not a good response for that scenario because you need that in the job that you're applying to, most likely. So I would definitely steer clear of anything that is going to be a requirement for the role. But then, too, I say be honest because you want to use a relevant weakness. Something that, if you can, say that you have overcome or you're working on. So, for example, one weakness of mine that I had was I had a difficult time managing my schedule because I had a lot of different priorities with school and work and extracurricular activities. And so what I decided to do was implement a few different tools that could manage my calendar. So I started to use Outlook. I actually took some trainings on using Outlook and using different categories to actually color code my calendar so I could easily see what tasks I would have throughout the day. And that really helped me to organize my schedule to where I could see my personal activities, my work activities, and then also my school activities, and make sure that I was getting everything accomplished every single day. And that has really helped me to where people are actually coming to me now asking for tips on managing their calendars. So you kind of spin it around. Okay, so yes, you can say a weakness, but you always want to make sure that it's not something that would interfere with the job that you're applying to. And then two, that you can say that you have worked on and made better, or that you are in process of working on, and you can actually give some details about that. So I just made that one up really quick, but hopefully you get what I mean by that. But that is a really good question. Yeah, but the worst times that I've heard responses to that question have been from accountants. I gotta admit, accountants, because I think they're not really expecting it. And a lot of times, no offense to any accountants in the chat, but they're very logical, very kind of by the book, step by step. And they will be very transparent about, what their weaknesses are. but you do kind of have to think and be a little creative with how you respond. You can't just say, this is my weakness and that's it. You still got to sell yourself. So you're always spinning questions to your advantage. Hi, Satin. Welcome. Welcome, welcome. Okay, and Web Savvy Cafe said, I see, thanks. Okay. Hopefully that makes sense, because that is a tough question. And I think with, again, any interview questions, you always want to spin it in a positive light, and showcase still your skills and abilities, even in answering the question. But that is a tough one. So thanks for that. That was a really good question. So very cool. So another thing that I tell people is to take a moment to just think about their response, because some occasions I get someone that they're asked a question, right? And then they just start going. And their answer is not clear or concise or to the point. And sometimes they don't even answer the question. For example, I asked someone about a time that they had to compromise on something. So they were working on a project and they needed to actually compromise on something. This actually happened this week. And this person proceeded to give an example. Totally didn't mention anything about compromising or needing to kind of work with a team. And they had to kind of work with them on any situation. No. So I asked them, okay, so what did you have to compromise on? Oh, nothing. I'm like, well, to go back to my original question, and it's just like, no, you're not even answering the question. So you just spent 2 minutes talking and you didn't answer the question because you were ready to start talking, but you didn't listen. So I always give that tip of taking a moment to just take in that question and think of a good example. If you have to write that question down or restate the question. I heard you say this. And then the interviewer will say yes or no. Another thing is some questions are loaded. Sometimes you just don't get a really good question and you're just like, what? What did you just ask me? And I get it. I have been asked those questions as a job seeker, and I actually change questions and am restating questions all the time because it's like, what? I need to change this because this doesn't make it clear to the person that has to answer. So if that's the case, you actually give the interviewer the chance to kind of say yes or no as far as you understanding that question, or if they need to restate the question in a different way to make it understandable, they can kind of recognize that and they have the opportunity. So that's just a tip, just to make sure that you're just not going and going without really knowing what in the world the question was. I also have sometimes situations where, and again, I say write the question down, because someone provides an example and they're telling their story and they're going and they're going and they're going. And then it's just like, what in the world are you even talking about at this point? They're just talking. And I don't even think they remember what the question originally was because they've gone so out there. So that would be my other tip. And so, yeah, those are kind of the main things. So Real Brother says, sometimes they will throw a crazy curve just to see how you'll respond. Yes, I actually knew a guy that did this. He had a lot of experience as a recruiter, and he had been a recruiter at a staffing firm for a while. And he would just throw in random questions, and he would do this sometimes on the phone interview and then in the face-to-face interview as well. He would just ask a random question, and see how the person would respond to see how well they would think on their feet. And so I remember, so when I talked earlier, I was talking about the situation where this girl was literally shaking in the interview. She was so nervous. I felt so bad for her. But a part of it was that she wasn't as prepared for interviewing, wasn't really used to interviews. But the other part was that this guy threw in a random question. And so it was like, that just made her even more nervous. He thought that what he was going to do is ask her this question. I don't remember what it was exactly, but he thought he would ask this silly question and it would kind of loosen her up a little bit. No, it made her way more nervous. And so it was tough. But yes, so real brother, that definitely happens. Interviewers have different techniques. So, and if you think about, if you're talking to anyone from HR or someone that's a recruiter, a lot of times our educational background will be either HR, business, or psychology. So a lot of HR professionals are really interested in understanding like how the mind works and what does a person do if this happens, or the reasons for them asking a question will have some kind of motive. So every question has a reason. So definitely. So remember that we typically have a psychology background or interest, and we want to know how you might react. I'm going to go through the comments to make sure I didn't miss anything here. But those are basically my tips. And we are at 41. I've been on here 40 minutes. Wow, time flies. Remember I told you guys I was going to be on here maybe 20 or 30 minutes? Time flies. Okay, so, yep. Mm-hmm. I'm going back into the comments and laughing at some of these. Oh, to go back to Real Brother's question about have I ever had to end an interview before completion? The other times I've had to end an interview has been because I have a situation where I already know the person is not a match for the role. They may be talking in a circle, like the interview really isn't going anywhere. They provided either too much information that is irrelevant, like they can't answer in a clear and concise way that I know they will need to, or they just don't match the requirements. Maybe they answered yes to meeting the requirements, but then they really don't when you talk to them. So that happens on occasion too. I think those are the main times, like if I like literally the phone interview is 30 or 45 minutes and I can't talk any longer to that person. Yeah. And then sometimes I cut interviews short literally just because of the time. Like I'm enjoying talking to the person, but I have another conversation or a meeting to move on to. And they may be a great match for the role. I already know. And, I already know I'm going to move them on anyway. But I just can't continue chatting with them. I have some really, good conversations with people, and it's like, oh, you're really nice. I would love to talk to you more. I can't. Oh, thanks, Pandy. Okay, well, good. I'm glad it was very helpful. And thank you, Real Brother. Thank you. Very nice comments. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for joining. So I did not plan on being on this live stream this long, actually. But if there are other questions, I'll stay on a little longer. Oh, Real Brother says, have you had a lot of situations where the person is clearly well qualified for the position, but their communication or lack thereof gives you strong pause? Yes, there are situations where I have that. So this is tough, and I think it'll be an even bigger challenge as we move into a different job market. But I've had plenty of scenarios where, yes, the person meets the criteria, but I've talked to candidates that meet the criteria also. However, their communication is a lot stronger. So I do a couple of things in this case. So um, with a person that I find their communication is a certain way, like maybe they're not giving enough detail or they are not very clear and concise and to the point, I will tell them. So, for example, if I'm asking about a behavioral based question or if I'm asking them about their experience, I will specify for them, okay, so here is what I am looking for. I need you to provide specific details for me. Also, sometimes people are just very general. I have told candidates, okay, I know it's very common for a person to hear a question and think very generally and say, this is what I would do, or this is what I, could, this is what I'm going to be looking for. And then if they still cannot answer the question with me walking it through them and saying, like, here is what I am looking for, they're not going to they're not going to pass the next steps of the interview if they literally can't even get that far. It's unfortunate, but I mean, I'm going to do more than our interview team is going to do. Okay. So overall, Real Brother, I'm going to do some coaching to try to see if I can get them there. They still can't respond in that way. It's unfortunate. Now, for really technical positions, that looks a little different. Depending on how much communication is needed for the role, will depend on if they get passed along. Like if they're very technical, but they don't really need to talk to people on a day-to-day basis, like communication is not, like verbal communication is not like a huge skill to have, and they can generally answer the questions. And I think they will have a chance at passing the interviews. I'll move them along for sure. And then I will provide some coaching to them. But again, the person has to be receptive to that. Hello, Iron Fist. Welcome to the live. Web Savvy Cafe. You're providing. Oh, well, thank you. She says, what you're providing in this venue is a great service to the number of people who may be forced to start a new career. Yes, I appreciate that comment. I definitely hope it is helpful because it's so interesting because just a couple months ago, we were just in a really tough market for companies. Like it was hard to find the right talent in a lot of different industries. And so things just changed so quickly. Okay, so Iron Fist says, can you recommend some agencies someone can use if they are applying for jobs in London from America or a recruiting place that looks for jobs in London? So you're in London. Okay. Yeah, I think I remember that from another live. So I haven't done anything much with the London market. It was maybe 5 years ago that actually helped a recruiter with some sourcing in the London market. So if anything comes to mind, I will definitely make a video. But as of right now, I'm not thinking of any. Okay, actually, there may be one company, I'm going to put it in the comments, that may provide some recruiting support in London. It's called Solomon Page. I've been connected with some people from there, and they may have some affiliation with London. So, but if I think of anything, I'll let you know. Web Savvy Cafe. Yeah, like software developers, they can be weird and non-talkative. Yeah, I mean, so if it's a personality thing, like if I just don't connect with your personality, I'm not going to not pass you on because of that. Because that could just be a bias that I have. Like maybe I just connect with people that are more like me and more social and talkative. However, there are definitely things that people can say. I try to focus on what the person is saying that can make them seem not quite a match from just like a culture standpoint. So, for example, I remember I was recruiting for a help desk manager, and this was at the PR firm. And I basically asked them to tell me about like how their management style was or something like that. And they went on to provide an example of how they kind of protected their team, I guess, in a way, but they were like, they worked at a hospital. The person worked at a hospital, and a doctor came to get some support with some kind of technical device they were using. I don't know if it was a phone, computer, or something medical, but he knocked on the door of like the help desk team. And I will never forget, this guy said, I went to the door. I told that doctor that he has to put through a ticket and he has to follow this process like this, and this, or else I am not going to respond to anything and yada, 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 yada. Like it was very off putting. It was like, that is not going to work in our environment. You can't like tell our VP of marketing, you can't come down to the help desk team and you got to follow this process. Don't come back down here. Like it was very awkward. So that is a different situation than someone just kind of coming off in their weird personality or seeming awkward to me. They may get along very well with the IT group or whatever team they're going to be a part of. So I try to not make assumptions. However, I will not say that all recruiters are like that. I've definitely seen people get passed over just because their personality doesn't match, because the recruiter typically will understand the culture of the team. So it just depends. But that scenario, it was so weird. I was actually training two girls to start phone interviews. It was like the absolute worst phone interview that they could sit in on. It was that guy. It's just like, they're not all like this, I promise. So it's kind of funny looking back at it. They don't have to have the interpersonal skills like we do. So Web Savvy Cafe, software engineers, yes, but there are definitely some technical jobs that will require, good communication. I mean, if you think about anything in IT support or IT operations, those roles are definitely going to be roles where you need solid communication. You may be talking with different stakeholders about incidents that are happening, like maybe, I don't know, a network went down somewhere. Well, you have to manage those situations and communicate with people and collaborate with people across the company. And I would definitely say at larger companies, communication is just going to be important either way, because you're constantly making sure management is up to date. And so there's not too many in a large company where it's not too many roles where you're not going to need some sense of solid communication. You can get away with it, I think, at smaller companies. Technical folks can definitely get a job, but in really large companies like a Google, for example, you're going to need some solid communication skills. There's just no getting around it. No way. Did I manage to read all the books behind me? No way. I think maybe if I had no job, like no day job, and had a good couple of months where I just read books, maybe, but no. Okay, rice and beans, grains and beans. Hello. I don't even think I said that. I think I commented to you before. That is a tongue twister for me. Rice and beans, grains and greens. I cannot say your username fast. What are your thoughts on trying to close the deal and land a job during the interview? Like, hey, do we got a deal? Am I your guy? I think it depends on the job. And I think it also depends on the feedback you're getting from that interviewer. So you definitely have to kind of read the different vibes that you're getting. So let's say for a very corporate role in a very maybe kind of maybe stuffy person, you're definitely not going to get away with that. But I would say in more of a lax environment, maybe you're, I don't know, interviewing for a digital role and it's just a cool kind of, chill environment. I think you could get away with saying like, so am I your guy, am I your guy, am I your girl, whatever. And they might get a laugh of that or whatever. I would say the best way to seal the deal is just confirming your interest in that company and closing the loop on any concerns that they might have. So asking them, are there any concerns or is there anything missing from my experience or anything that I presented here that you feel would not make me a great match for this role? And just ask them, and then that way you have that opportunity, if they were like, well, I'm not sure if you have enough marketing or I don't know if you have enough sales experience. Well, you have that chance to say, really? Well, let me share a little more about my background in sales. And that may close the loop with them. So if they had any kind of concern for you, you're taking that opportunity to actually close the deal with them and say, oh, okay, well, I'm going to turn it around and share with you why I'm the perfect match for the job. Then you can also share other skills that you feel will be a great match. So make sure you're actively listening throughout the interview. So if there was anything that you picked up on, like, oh, it would be great if this person had this skill. Just to remind you, I actually have training in this. And I think that would be a great match for this role. And I could bring X, Y, and Z to the company. Just make sure you're, really focusing on the result. Like, how can you make this person's life easier? How can you advance the team? How can you be an asset? That's what they're looking for you to be an asset. So just remind them of that. Web Savvy Cafe. Yes, I had a hard time getting them to say good morning. Oh my gosh. I actually, at the PR firm I worked at prior to the CPG company I'm with right now, HR was actually connected to the IT team. We were on the same floor. And so I recruited for the IT teams and the PR teams. And so I would actually go to the IT department, their area, and just pop by and, say hello. Like I said, I'm social. So I'm like, hey, how's everyone doing? And so there would be people that I recruited. And so I would also check up on them, like, how's everything going? Yada, yada. There was one situation, everyone was in a cube, like everyone's in cubicles. So let's say this is like the bar separating one cube from the other. So I'm talking to this person and I'm like, oh, well, have you seen Ryan? Ryan's right here. Oh, no, I haven't seen them. Yeah, I don't know if they're here. And I'm like, oh, okay. And so I walk over and look who it is. Ryan, right here, sitting right there. They haven't even gotten up, stood up, looked over anything. So it is definitely a different kind of scenario. I will say that this particular team that I was engaging with, they were all developers for an SAP-like system. So it was just funny. Sometimes I would just be like, but I don't understand. But hey, different personalities. It worked for them. LOL, do you remember me from last time? Yes, I remember you joined my first live. Iron Fist. Rice and beans, grains and greens. Most people just say rice and beans. LOL, yeah. Exactly. Real brother, it's funny that you mentioned the books. I've been checking out all the titles. Oh my gosh. I think I've only read. Now I'm put on the spot and I can't find it. Yeah, I can't find it. It's like a book I read a long time ago. So Lord of the Flies I read. I'm not finding the other one. Oh well. If for okay, rice and beans, grains and greens. If we're selling ourselves, we might as well try to close the deal. Put them on the hot seat for once. I think if you are comfortable with that, I think that works. I think you still have to read the personality because, and I think you have to read people's personalities in general to kind of see what you might be able to get away with. But yeah, I mean, it will be a gamble. Some people may take that in a really good way. Others may take it as, oh, this person's really cocky. They think they already got the job, but yada, yada, yada. So it depends. It really depends. But I think you should definitely always try to sell whatever skills you have at the end, like close it out that way. And then also make sure you kind of figure out if there's anything that the interviewer feels that you might be missing so that you can address it during that time, because that's the time that you have. You have that interview. And then if you follow up with a thank you note, to my earlier point, those are your times. Like, that's it. So you definitely have to use the time wisely. Okay. What do I think about jobs that don't list a salary or a salary range? Why do companies do that usually? Yeah, some companies may list the range. I would say in general, there's so much research you can do with the position. You can kind of research the salaries yourself on like pay scale, taking into account different locations, and sometimes people kind of overestimate their salaries when they go on these online things. But you can definitely get some market data around salaries to help you. But the other thing about the salary is that most companies are not going to put a range out there, except for government jobs. I will definitely say they always do. But they don't want to be locked in to a salary because the salary is going to encompass market data, typically, the individual skill set. So if you have, I don't know, a master's degree or some niche skill, that may cause them to rethink the salary requirement, or they may rethink about your experience or your skills and say, oh, we actually really need that. So it would take away from their flexibility to really change that salary. But internally, we do stick to certain market data that we have. We have to look at internal equity and things like that to consider. But yeah, I mean, it's going to depend on the job. It's going to depend on the market data for that job, for that location. And then it's also going to be a part of what you actually would bring to the table and what kind of skills and qualifications you have. So there's a lot of things to consider when looking at a salary. Okay, so I have been on here way longer than I anticipated. So I'm going to go soon, but if there are any last minute questions, I'm happy to answer. And just to kind of reinforce the earlier points. So I started out just talking about the 3 things that you should always say during an interview. And so the first thing was to always state your interests. So what actually interested you in that job and in that company, and be ready to talk about that. And you should say it even if you have not been asked about it. Always, always, always. Number two was to just make sure that you're talking about why you're qualified for that job. And then the last one was to always, always, always follow up with a thank you in person or on the phone. We're doing virtual interviews now, and then with a thank you note. So I'm going to close things out. I don't see any other questions here, but I do thank you all for joining. If you haven't already, definitely subscribe if you're interested in this type of content. If you know someone that is actively on the job search, definitely share these tips with them as well. And thank you all for joining. I will see you in the next video. Bye, good night, and stay safe.